welcome to the GOYA Gatherings podcast, a serene and inspiring space where the worlds of yoga and wellness converge. Every episode is a journey into the heart of yoga, offering you deep insights, uplifting stories, and practical wisdom. Our conversations are designed to inspire your journey and illuminate your path to well-being. Please remember that the views expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of GOYA Gatherings or its hosts.
Welcome to the GOYA Gatherings podcast. My name is Mark. I'm part of the leadership team here at GOYA. My guest on the podcast today is Danielle, who you'll find out a lot more about throughout this episode. But Danielle began the journey in the world of movement and expression and carried that passion into supporting others through physical therapy and wellness, and has ultimately found a home in yoga and teaching yoga. Along the way, Danielle's been crafting a life in Philadelphia that reflects creativity and intention in community. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Danielle's insights today. So let's dive in and get started. So welcome to the GOYA Gatherings podcast, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's really lovely to have you here. And I'm really looking forward to finding out a little bit more about you, because I think from what I know about you in preparing for this episode is there's a kind of a thread throughout your career and your life in terms of the body and movement. And I think that can resonate with a lot of people, like who may have been. I had a lot of friends who were performers in dance or music and then moved into some different modalities in the realm of yoga and healing and therapy. So I think if I'm correct, then I think
Yes.
we're good. Yes. Okay.
Yes, it's a common theme and a common thread that I have definitely seen over the years too. I also have many friends who were performers, dancers, and have found their way into different healing modalities, yoga, wellness, massage, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I think there's something we all have in common that probably draws us to these sorts of avenues.
Love it. So we'll start by finding out a little bit more about you. So what would be your elevator pitch? Like, it's a long elevator ride and we need to find out who you are and what it is that you do in.
Yeah, so I teach yoga and I teach yoga teacher trainings, and I have always considered myself to be a healer, and that's something that I continue to be very curious about and exploring different holistic practices that, with Reiki. I'm really interested currently in like spinal flow and craniosacral things. So that's kind of on my horizon for things to learn and explore. I grew up dancing from a very young age, probably the age of 3, just like your parents sign you up for a dance class and put you in a little tutu and that you run around the studio. But it's something that I always loved. And so I continued dancing through high school. And then I was in pre-professional training program for ballet, which is a lot on the body. And so I started dealing with injuries as we all tend to do in our respective sports and hobbies and things like that. And so I had to, for the first time, sort of consider what I might do if I wasn't dancing. Because at that point I was dancing over 40 hours a week. I went to school part-time and I danced full-time. And that's also kind of like very formative years where you're sort of grasping your identity and your place in this world. And so that was definitely an interesting period. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more, but kind of exploring, okay, if I'm not dancing, what would I to be doing? And I was doing a lot of physical therapy for all of my injuries. And my physical therapist was a former dancer. And so that sort of got me interested in, well, okay, this is what she's chosen to do, the direction she's chosen to follow. And I'm very interested in the body and I like learning what she has to say and the ins and outs of the physiology of it. And so I sort of pivoted and went the route of physical therapy or physiotherapy um, for those outside of the United States. And I did that for a little while, but I was kind of missing the connection and expression of movement that kind of redirected me back into yoga. And I we're maybe we're at the top of the elevator at this point, so that's probably a good summary. And there's more to it, but I've everything that I've done throughout my life has been a study of I would say a study of the body in the broadest sense. And what plays into that. So whether that's, your expression, in dance, it might be you're telling a story. So you're expressing feeling. And you're, a lot of times embodying a character. And then in physical therapy, it was more diving into pain, people's pain and discomfort, and how that presents in the body. Because I very quickly realized that not all injuries are just, oh, I tripped off of a curb and rolled my ankle. Majority of injuries that people deal with are like overuse and repetitive things. And, they're like, I do this all the time. Why is it this one day, I tweaked my back or people say like I threw my back out. Um, why this one time? I've been doing this my whole life. And so I very quickly realized to start to ask the questions like, well, what kind of state were you in when that was happening? Like what's going on in your life? And very often there's an emotional element to it or a stress element to it. They're, you know, they're dealing with something or there's something other than just the physical material injury that occurs. And I just got really curious about it. I was like, oh, there's a lot more to this. And there's a lot more to it than I'm allowed to dive into within the scope of the medical practice. And so that's when I sort of started leaning into yoga, as I found like I was a yoga teacher as well at the time. Um, and so, I could work pranayama and breath work and sort of some yoga guided things into my work with patients. But I often found that I was recommending other holistic therapies to patients. Um, whether that was, like a psychotherapy or acupuncture or different things that they could start to explore what's the root of their pain or some of these traumas in their body, because I knew it was more than what I was allowed to address from a purely physical therapy, you know, uh, doctorate of physical therapy, medical practice lens. And And then I realized, like, I want to be doing that. Like, I want to be the person that helps them, like, dig deep and unearth some of these things and start to build a relationship with what they're feeling in their body and what happens before it becomes an injury,
Mm.
if that makes sense. So, like, what to do with these things that we feel that maybe we repress or don't know how to express well that later manifests as something physical in the body. And that's just been hugely fascinating to me, and so that sort of steered me into more of yoga and Reiki and, um, intuitive healing practices, and so that's kind of where I find myself today. Always evolving and continuing to explore, um, based on what my clients and my students are feeling and myself. As most of us who work or find ourselves in the yoga world, we tend to be feelers, people who feel things deeply, very sensitive souls. And I just recently in Bali had a Balinese Hindu priest, they explained to me that it's, for some of us, it's part of our karma to feel these things so strongly in our body because we are those who are meant to help other people heal and understand what it is that they're feeling. And he was like, the quicker that you accept that and embrace that and just and go forward with it and run with it, the I don't know. He didn't say the easier life will be, but kind of alluded to things, unfolding in front of you. He was like, you've, uh, you've always known you're meant to be a healer, and tried it in different ways, and you've found what doesn't work, and he's like, but just keep going. This is your path. Keep going. And I'm like, okay, I choose to trust this.
I mean, that's all you can do sometimes, right? Is just
Yes. Hmm.
trust the flow, the process.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And
Did
so,
you feel did you feel like very I think you alluded to it, but did you feel very constrained as a physical therapist, as a physiotherapist? Like,
yes,
because I know that at least in other places in the world, like it is really regulated in terms of like how far out of the scope of practice you can
absolutely.
venture. Do you think in an alternate reality, if physical therapy or physiotherapy had allowed you to explore those things and incorporate them, you might have stayed within that world?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Um, you're right on with that. It is, I mean, I guess it's just the nature of the society that we are in right now that everything is regulated and everyone has to fit into these boxes. And especially, um, I know it exists elsewhere too, but especially in the States, there's a lot of just between the different fields, physical therapy, acupuncture, massage therapy, dry needling, all these different modalities that one might use. Everyone has their own scope of practice, and you can't stray from that. And there's always continuous legislation going back and forth between who is allowed to do what and call it what, and what is, breaching over into someone else's avenue. And so I found that to be really very constraining because we know this, but maybe the medical system doesn't always quite recognize yet that nothing is like a one size fits all. And even body parts, like you go to you go to a shoulder specialist or knee specialist or hip specialist or an internist, and there's very rarely someone who's looking at the whole picture, the whole self, the body, the mind, the spirit, and how all of those things interplay. And we know that they do. But the medical system isn't quite set up to look at humans in that way yet. I hope that that will happen one day. But so that was quite challenging. But the other part of it that was quite constraining was you're working within insurance and working with insurance companies in the medical field. And so, there's someone behind a computer that says, okay, this person's had a knee replacement. Here's They get 8 visits. And like there's no one is coming back to their full capacity, their full normal life after something like that within 8 visits. And so it becomes, you're going to battle for your patients with these insurance companies, trying to convince them that this person needs more care, that we can't just be like, okay, you're done because your insurance company no longer wants to pay for it. And the reality of paying for something like physical therapy out of pocket is just not feasible for the majority of people. Um, it's simply not. And so it was quite heartbreaking and disenchanting to to not be able to help people to the fullest, whether it was because of insurance limitations or just the scope of practice of my license. And so I decided that, I think that there are better ways that I can help people. And that meant taking a step back from my career, and well, actually, leaving it. Not that you really ever leave it, but I don't practice physical therapy anymore, and it doesn't mean that I don't utilize it and use all of that knowledge, because I do. But I wanted to find something that felt more, not just fulfilling for myself personally, but felt like I was doing like more good and doing right by my clients, and
And that's
not having all these the bound limitations on it.
and
And
that's something with yoga
yes, yoga and
specifically.
more. Yes, yoga and more. And so yes, we call it yoga. I work with private clients. I love teaching in studio classes, group fitness classes, but I would say that my primary role is working with people one on one, with private clients, because I'm able to do, just exactly that. Like I said, I'm able to look at the whole person. And yes, we call it yoga, but it's kind of an umbrella term that, some days we're addressing the emotional body. And some days where, maybe we are working through some trauma or doing some, parts work, and, you know, having clients' parts all come sit around the imaginary campfire with them and have a conversation with one another, and build connections and learn to build better relationships with the multitude of things that every person has going on within them. And so yeah, so it's very freeing. I don't put I try not to, without doing anything that would be unethical or illegal, but I try not to put any limitations on what yoga really means, because we all know it's not just the physical, it's not just the asana, it's not even just meditation and pranayama. It's being able to utilize it for life. It's practice for life and dealing with real actual life things. And so I'm not afraid with my clients to like dig into life stuff and sticky stuff and messy stuff, because the practice is there for that too, I believe.
It's interesting. What you're saying is really interesting to me because I remember when I began teaching yoga, just like the physical classes, like studio
Mhm.
classes, and how you would have those interactions where students would come up after and they'd want to talk about more things, or,
Yes.
like they'd want to talk about how they felt emotionally, or if you check in before, they would share with you things that you think in those few seconds of being like, hey, how are you today? That wouldn't be a moment to do that. But I think even if we extract just the physical practice of yoga, I think inherently built within it is this access that it has, the physical movement, to the emotional body, the mental body, the spiritual body, that it makes sense to, even those, like, as a yoga teacher, it makes sense to try and like think about yoga as more than the movement itself, because it historically is. And also you see in your classes, well, I saw in my classes, even before I wanted to touch on those things, that it was happening naturally. Like it's just a natural side
Yes.
effect of those things. So whereas you're in a studio class, you've got 5 minutes before the next one, you're like, okay, yeah, you're trying to do what you can and hold space for that time. But I could imagine being able to then sit down for half an hour, in their home as a private client and then really work through things, really talk about things and reflect and give them exercises that aren't movement based would feel so wonderful. It's like being in a teacher training when you get to those like really
Exactly.
deep moments, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where all the healing really happens too. It's like that's the funny thing about teacher trainings is I think for most of us, we go into it thinking, "Oh, we're going to learn how to teach yoga and we're going to, break down these asana and learn how to, you know, cue appropriately and find nice alignment and all of these things." And then what you don't really expect is all of the conversation and the I guess the more like philosophical side of things and the just the opening your mind to some different concepts and ideas and hearing about, your other students, your peers, experiences. And like that's I think where all the magic tends to happen. And so that's kind of exactly it. Like that's what I don't want to cut that off. And it's hard as a teacher and a student, like you said, you have 5 minutes after the class and your student has something important that they would like to share. And I feel like what's always hard at any yoga teacher listening would probably resonate with this is, like what's appropriate? Like what's the appropriate boundaries? Because, we're taught and we learn in our yoga teacher training, okay, you're not the doctor. And so, you to be cautious, not to give advice, give, medical advice or, say, oh, I'm really feeling this like pinchy pain in my chaturanga, and it's like there's a part of us, that we want to help them. Of course, you hear that you want to hear, you want to dive deeper with them, you want to help them. But then there's also the part of you that's like, okay, we have to worry about lawsuits and you need to make sure not to speak out of turn or, give on advice on something that you are maybe not qualified or legally allowed to give advice on, and that's always hard. Or even just getting like too personal and the personal details with someone. And so I do think there's certainly a time and place for those things. And so that's exactly one of those scenarios where, okay, so maybe that's not appropriate within like a group class setting. But if there's someone who's like they're interested in diving a little deeper into what they're experiencing, then like working one on one with them, like that might be a good avenue. In which case, then you can kind of speak to them and sort of lay out like what you are comfortable talking about and working through and what their expectations are. And that always changes too. Um, because I certainly when I first started taking private clients and working with people one on one, I was, very much like, you know, I'm here. Our agreement is that I'm here and I'm to teach you yoga. And, we can chit chat and catch up for a few minutes in the beginning, but then, we're going to get moving. And I just quickly realized that that's not how life works all the time because people don't just show up ready to, ready to move and ready to practice. It's not always realistic. And so I've learned so much working with people one on one. I always tell them, I'm like, just you might consider me the teacher, but you're just as much my teacher because I learned so much from you as well. And how to find that right balance. And even though maybe we're we're not taught to let's put it this way. I even have friends, who work as therapists, like psychotherapy therapists or counselors and things like that. And they've all given me like really excellent advice on how to have healthy boundaries with clients and things like that. And And that is a very good practice to have, healthy boundaries. But at the same time, one of the greatest things that I keep learning is that, you know, yoga isn't just one thing. It's like there's so much to it. And there's so much to each of us. And there's layers upon layers. And, if we really want to do some true healing, we have to be willing to unpack more than just physical, mental, emotional layers. We have to be willing to unpack it all or help our students at least give them the tools that they can explore further, or give them some direction, um, of other professionals that they can go to find, because not that we should take on every role. We can't, but we can we can do more than I think we believe we can sometimes. And
Do you?
go ahead, yeah.
No, no, keep going.
it's it's I it's hard to not pigeonhole yourself into, what it is that you do. But I'm someone who I don't believe in just being any one thing. So like if I have to say, yeah, I'll say I'm a yoga teacher. But it doesn't, there's so much more to it than that. I don't like to put limits on myself for sure, but it's because I don't want, the people I work with, I don't want people to put limits on themselves.
Mhm.
I need to be open to all possibilities and that we can be many things at once and many things in this lifetime, and it's okay for us to follow our curiosities and explore different things, which I think is a hard that's been a hard lesson, I guess, for me to learn. If you think like, I went to college and university, I spent so many years and so much money learning to do one thing, and then it wasn't all that satisfying. And believe me, I did a lot of therapy to be able to be okay with leaving that behind and not viewing that as a failure. Because when you're in your early 20s, a lot of times making pivots in life, that's what it feels like, whether it's a career or relationship or something like that. It feels like when something isn't working out, like, that you're failing at it. And I've come to a whole different perspective and view on that. And I'm like, no, you're not meant to do just one thing. Like, you have this life, like, explore what you're curious about and like never stop learning. And so I apply that also to teaching yoga. And what I want students to get from that is like, follow what you're curious about, and don't stop learning about yourself, your body, all of these things.
Do you? Oh, what's interesting is sometimes I give the advice to people when they ask like about studying things, um, or about like I have friends who studied certain things in university, did it for a while, and like yourself, like it's not even necessarily a pivot, but moved on from there because it's
Hmm.
still within the same realm. But it's like you don't know till you try something.
Exactly.
Like and like it's not like the trying and the discovering and then seeing if it's the right fit for you is not a failure on a person's part, because if it didn't cost anything and if all those other like barriers and layers weren't put on top of it that required that it felt like such a huge massive thing to take on, then maybe we'd be more curious as people to be like, oh, I wonder what it would be like to like be a psychologist. I'm going to go and take a year of psychology and see how that fits for me. Or maybe I do all of it and then I change. Like there's, it's almost like it's curiosity is human nature. That's how we
Mhm.
became who we are, was by, you know, like someone had to come up with the curious idea to start rubbing things together to make fire
Yeah.
and so on. Like it's innate within us, but I think that society has tended to want us to not be so curious, and if we do anything that steps outside of that, then it's seen as failure or not trying or not sticking with things. And
Mhm.
but it doesn't, I think, for myself at least, from listening to you, it's like, yeah, it seems natural that you would, from where you came from dance and ballet and physical therapy, obviously, hopefully helping you, and seeing a mentor in that field, it makes logical sense. Because to me, seem like you would have to do that for the rest of your days. Because, yeah.
Right. And and there's a lot of societal expectation of that as well. Um, and so, I can't even count the number of times that even to this day, people ask me, "Well, do you see yourself going back to physical therapy?" Almost out of concern because
Oh.
I think, um, especially maybe with some of older generations, it's seen as stable to have a career and to stick with it and to build up time, even to stick with a certain like a company and to build up time and have this, long stretch written on your resume. And any, the kind of the advice of, we have a job, you have to at least stick with it for a year, because otherwise it doesn't look good on a resume. and and all those sorts of things. And I've heard it all, and I've I've considered it all. But I laugh now because if anyone were to look at my resume, they'd be like, "What does this girl do?" The number of strange jobs like I love baking. I was really curious about baking, so I spent a couple years working in a bakery. I was still teaching yoga as well. I also spent a time delivering packages for UPS, and that was one of the most fun and random jobs I ever had. But I was like, "Why? Like, why do I have to do one thing? I have a lot of different interests." And I spent my whole life focusing on dance, my whole life, my whole childhood, my whole life
But
until
formative.
adult, yeah, formative years focusing solely on one thing. I had one goal in mind. I was going to, be a professional ballerina, and I spent more time than I spent sleeping or studying and going to school, focusing on that and giving it absolutely everything I had. And maybe that's partly why, my blossoming, my exit out of the dance world became just, I want to do everything. And I don't want to, you know, dig myself into a hole, or, burnout is very real. And certainly I, broke myself down with injuries, and we all experience burnout in different ways, but I don't want to, I don't want to do that again. I want to, let myself pivot and explore and just flow and see where my interests take me. And I really like what you said about, you never know until you try. And that's most often the advice I give my students. My one client that I've been working with him for a long, long time, maybe 7 years. And and he laughs because anytime I ask the question, he's like, I already know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say, well, try it and find out. I'm like, you bet. So we try it. Yeah, we try it and you try and see. And you're never as stuck as someone who has spent a lot of time in adolescence and young adulthood feeling like I was stuck and feeling like, okay, well, I chose this path. I have to see it through. the biggest piece of advice that I would ever want to give anyone is no matter how stuck you might feel in anything, in a career, in a relationship, in life, in half pigeon, you're never stuck. You're never as stuck as you believe yourself to be. There's movement available. There are other options. There are other choices. You might not see them right now, but that's where the importance of having other people and other connections and support systems come into play. You're not stuck. You always have. y- There's other options. There's other choices, and that's something that I've taken away from all of this. Is
When you were making the transition from physical therapy to like, oh, I'm gonna teach
Mhm.
yoga.
Yeah,
I know it's not yoga, but I'm gonna teach this.
full
Did you
time.
find full-time something?
Yeah.
Did you find that support system in the world of yoga? Like, did you feel supported in the yoga community?
Yes, yes. I would say, yeah, support came from different places for sure. But definitely, you know, it took a little bit of a leap of faith and to leave a stable career job and decide to, give it a try. Try and see. Teaching yoga full time. And it helped to, immerse yourself into that world. And then you meet other people, other teachers, and you see how they're doing it and what they've learned and what worked and what didn't work and how they find balance in, you know, teaching full time. Like that's it's not for the faint of heart. It felt like a lovely reprieve from, the salaried career role. But it's you also it is very physical and you're holding space. And so it can at times be draining, emotionally and energetically. Um, and so I just I learned to talk to people about what I'm experiencing and not just it was around the time in my life when I was learning that I'm not alone, that I'm not in this by myself, and I'm not the only person in the world to be experiencing what I'm experiencing. And so I learned to start talking to other people. And so talking to other teachers, talking to students who used to be teachers and, and maybe now they're retired and but they still come to the studio and practice. And just taking advice from them and learning to be, I guess, a little like open and vulnerable. Like even in like I found myself managing a yoga studio. And so that was a full-time job and that was a big undertaking. And I luckily had people around me in that studio who had done that job in the past. And they've now, they've moved on and they're exploring and trying out something else. But I had them there to talk to, and that was invaluable. They like, yeah, couldn't put a price on it. I was so fortunate to have people like that, again, mentors, um, who could say, yeah, and you know what? At times you're gonna feel like this. And at times you might, go sit and have a cry in the shower. And, when you're having those things, like you call me or this is what I do. And so I started to find work-life balance because it's hard when you you know, usually we come to yoga because we love it, and it is hard when you take things that you love or you're passionate about, um, and you blend that with work, and it becomes a job. Um, And that can be a hard balance to find. And so that's been, trial and error, you try and see and you find what works. And I've certainly, you know, gone too far in one direction and too far in the other direction. And now I have myself at a happy medium. And for me, that's been a balancing, um, not teaching full time at a studio, doing like group classes. And that's been, balancing that, doing a little bit of that, but also a lot of working with people one on one, because I've just been able to manage my own energy and capacity better that way. I just found that's what works for me. And but you just to try and see some of the things, you have to go through to figure it out, right? Go through it and grow through it to figure out what is going to work for you. But it's hard, I think when we first become a yoga teacher, we're so excited and we want to teach all the classes and create all the fun sequences and all the amazing playlists and all of that. And that's great. And all of that excitement and energy, that's gonna carry you pretty far. But then at some point, you're going to start to consider what's sustainable for you, in life. And so then that's when you start experimenting and tweaking a little bit, adding and
Do you
subtracting things.
do you think that process of finding balance and like individualizing basically a yoga career, because that's really what we do, right? Because I think most everybody I know and from myself personally went through that process of like starting in a studio, teaching way too many classes, saying yes to everything to, to find out all these things. What do I like? What styles do I like teaching? What
Mhm.
populations of people do I like teaching? What format do I prefer? All those things. And then you kind of arrive, like a lot of people arrive at that point where you sort of figure those things out, and then and then what else? Like, so a
Mhm.
lot of people go into Reiki, other healing modalities, cranial sacral, massage, counsel. Like, it constantly seems like the possibilities when you expand, like you were saying at the beginning, when you expand your idea of what yoga is, and when you're not so limited by yoga being what maybe Western society has decided that yoga is, but when we can
Mhm.
think outside of it, all of a sudden, the world is your oyster in terms of things that you can start studying and then maybe sharing and offering, but also it looked like making this like a blueprint for your life as to how you want to live your life. It doesn't exist in many careers, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Um, I agree with that entirely. And I think one of the funny things is that I learned is just to share what interests you, and then that you like watch it spark a curiosity in someone else. And so, like, even when I teach in studio class, you know if it's like I'm like, really, I just did a webinar or something on Ayurveda, and I'm just, like really excited and having a good time of, exploring that. And I might say, like, hey, this might sound a little new. You might not have heard of this before, but and weave some Ayurvedic philosophy into the yoga practice. And like some people might be like, all right, she's on something. Yeah, she's going down a path today. But there's also this someone who comes up to you after class and they're like, okay, I actually like really have been interested in that. Like, how did you start learning about that? And I might be like, oh, I've got a great book for you, a great podcast. I love bringing books to students. I don't know if you're the same way, but I have an entire library of yoga, spirituality, all kinds of books. I love to read because I love to learn. And so almost any question anyone ever asks me, I'm like, I have a book for you. I'll bring it next week.
It's a mobile library.
It's a mobile library. And then I'm like, and then pass it on. If that, your friend sees it on a coffee table and they're like, what is that? You give it to them. and that's how it spreads. But I think that that's like a good demonstration for them. They could, maybe they're a nurse, or, they get, or an engineer, or they work in IT or whatever it is, but I can have interests outside of, my career. It doesn't have to be my sole identity. And I think maybe that's kind of my whole point, is that, you know, there are so many possibilities. And yeah, kind of like you said, we find ourselves like, okay, like what's next? Or what else? And like for me, I learned that one of the like what I tried to think of, like, well, what was it that it wasn't that I hated practicing physical therapy. There was parts of it that I really did love. And so I just sit down and be like, well, what were those elements? And I liked talking with my patients. I could sit there and chat with them all day long, and not just because I like talking, but because it was building a connection, and the ones that you have a relationship with, and you genuinely like want to know, how their kid's birthday party was over the weekend. And I was building connections, and building relationships, and I really liked educating, like teaching them about, like, it, you know, a lot of times you go to the doctor, and they're in and out in 5 minutes, and they're like, "Oh, you feel this? Okay, it's this. Get go here, get this. See you in
Mm.
6 weeks." And I really like taking the time to actually teach them about, their injury, or what it is that they're experiencing, and, open the book and show them pictures, or bring out this, skeleton and show them. And, this is, it's meant to move this way, but, you're having this restriction here. And so this is what's happening. And I found that was something that made a huge difference. And I was like, oh yeah, I really like teaching. And even when I was, in college, and I, was always working at least 3 jobs at any given moment, but I really liked being like a teacher's assistant, and working with, the the class under me, and going back into the anatomy lab, and teaching and educating. And so I think that's also, like, that's what sparked my interest in teacher trainings, because I find, like, yes, I love coming up with a fun flow, a nice creative sequence to teach on, my Sunday morning yoga class. Um, but I like educating. And so that's something that, that lights me up. And so I've sort of discovered that to also be a common thread in these different paths I've taken too. And so I think that's also something important in life, is, it's not always going to be something obvious. It doesn't have to, you could be, you could find yourself working in any sort of job, and, what did working at the bakery and physical therapy have in common? I liked working with my hands.
Mm.
And it felt like you putting my heart into something. And so, things can seem unrelated, and they might seem like you're, making a pivot, or, like, seem out of nowhere, but it's not. There's a reason, there probably is a common thread. There probably is a reason that we're drawn to the things we're drawn to.
Maybe that's one of the things you might say to this next question, but what would be the top three pieces of advice you would give to someone who was thinking, oh, I think I'm going to leave my current job and become a yoga teacher? What would you
Oh,
say to them?
oh, that's a great question. Well, one, try it. You try and you see. So go for it. Yeah. So I always say, you have my my full my full support in going for it. But also, and then maybe number 2 is talk to other people. Talk to other yoga teachers or other people who are like oftentimes, unless maybe you're teaching full time somewhere, um you're teaching a bunch of different places. You're sort of working for yourself. And you have a few classes, at different places, and you're having to, market for market yourself, your offerings, your classes. And that can feel it can sometimes feel like you're treading water. And so talk to other people who do that. And not even, doesn't have to be yoga teachers, but, people who work in different wellness spaces and who maybe find, like, so that they say we're gig workers, find little bits of work in different places, um, and how they piece that together and how they find balance. And, and I would say the last piece of advice would be, don't be afraid to accept when something isn't working for you. Because I think that sometimes when you do something like that, you leave your career. It feels like you're making a big statement. Like you're taking a stand and like you're doing it. I'm taking the plunge. I'm doing this full time. And maybe you tell all your friends and family. And then maybe you realize, okay, this is actually really hard. Or maybe I'm not actually making the amount of money I need to, afford to live on my own and, and live in this city or whatever it is. And so, like, don't be afraid to, again, make changes. You're not stuck. So if you could still love it. It doesn't mean you don't love it. It doesn't mean you're not the most amazing yoga teacher. But it's also, you have to live your life. You need to be able to take care of yourself and have your health insurance and whatever it is that you might need. Those things are important as well. And so don't be afraid to always make changes and admit when something is not quite right. And maybe you do that and then you realize, okay, it's close, but maybe it's still not exactly what I'm going for. And or it sounded great at the time, but maybe it's not now. Because think that's like life is always changing, always evolving. And so it's okay for us to change our minds too. It's okay for our interests to change, and it's okay for our priorities to change too. You might be like, "Oh, it's like I'm going to travel the world and teach yoga and this is great and I have, no ties at home and that's great." But then you might also come to a time where you meet someone or you realize that it might be nice to have some roots and plant myself somewhere, and that doesn't mean that I don't still love doing that and go teach teaching retreats, but maybe it means that, okay, I do that once or twice a year, but I also have a home base. And I say that partly from experience, my own experience too. um we change and we should change, and that's okay. And so I would say those would be my 3. You go for it, you try it, you surround yourself with people, you talk about what you're experiencing, the good, the bad, the ugly, the messy, all of it. And you seek advice from people. And then 3, you don't be afraid to change your mind or change your path again and again and again.
Is this something that you might share with, like, do you find in your teacher training programs? Obviously, there's probably a whole diverse range of people, but there are a, maybe a good number of people who are looking for that change
Hmm.
who come to do yoga teacher training programs.
Yes. Yeah. I always find that to be, I feel like anyone who shows up at a yoga teacher training or a yoga retreat, like, you're either going through something or you've just gone through something, right? Something like monumental or significant in your life. Um, and so, yeah, that tends to be a, a common topic of conversation and things that are brought up. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts about not just as like a facilitator of of a training or a retreat, but also just being a part of the circle, the bubble of it all, is that you have those lifelong connections. And so when you do, leave the training or leave the training, you go back home and you start to explore, okay, my new life as a yoga teacher and all that is, you're going to hit some bumps in the road and there's going to be obstacles and there's going to be times where, y- there's a little bit of a downslope or you hit a rough patch, and so but you have those people that you had that experience with. You have your teachers, the facilitators that you had this experience with, and so you reach out to them, you stay in touch, you stay in communication, and you're there for each other for all that, and especially for the hard parts, because anything new is new. You've never done it before. You're not supposed to know exactly how it goes and how everything works. And there's a lot of, you reach out to people because, if that person doesn't know, they have a resource, they have a book, or they have something like Goya where they can direct you. There's resources where, you can, there's people out there who can guide you. There's people who have done this before and can help guide you. And so I think it's definitely something that is talked about and should be talked about in trainings, because otherwise it's like you step off the plane or, wherever it is that you did your training, you come back home, you get out of the car, you step on the plane, and it's like, well, okay, well, what now? And how do I do this? And not only that, but you just had a life-changing experience and you come out of it a different person, but you go back home where things are seemingly the same.
Mhm.
And well, like, okay, how do I blend back into my life? And do I try to blend back into my life? Or am I setting fire to it and starting everything all over again? Like, what do I do? And I find that that's I have had that experience many times, and students that I've had as well. And so we just have to be there for one another and realize that, we don't have to go through this. I don't think we're meant to go through life alone. I think we're meant to meet people and build these connections and actually reach out for the important things, not just, you know, how are you? How was your summer? Like what are you going through? What's weighing on you right now? What is there anything that you'd like to share,
I guess it goes back to your number two thing that you suggested to people who were wondering about this was like surround yourself with people who you can talk to and share and like that
Mm-hmm.
sense of communities. Because like maybe someone listening to this is in a career that they're maybe feeling constrained by, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll hear your story and think like, oh, I had never, even if you've thought of it before, sometimes just hearing someone else verbalize something that you maybe experiencing in a similar way helps you to feel not alone.
Yes.
And like you said at the very beginning of this podcast, something I think that something you had discovered over the a period of time, like that you're not the first person to do this, or like you're not the first person to feel this, and like
Yeah.
changing careers, especially as we become older, as we gain years, does feel scary, and it can feel isolated because maybe people
Mm-hmm.
have they're surrounded by people in that same field, and all of a sudden, so it's like that's why like yoga communities, studio communities, training communities, all these places are we can find other people there reflecting back maybe what it is that we see within ourselves, and then find that inspiration, because I think like a lot of my career choices have been inspired by people I've learned from in the yoga community. You
Yes.
know, like seeing that teacher who held philosophy classes in their house that I attended and thinking like, oh my God, I'd love to spend my days studying more philosophy and then one day be able to lead a session like them, and then doing that in a teacher training program and realizing later, like looking back and being like, oh, that's because I had this experience. Like it's community is so important, and I'm really glad that you brought it up as like, you know, your second piece of advice to someone and are linking it back here, because sometimes it can feel isolating if we don't
For sure.
talk and share and we're not honest about what we're experiencing, because that's the other thing you said too, is like being honest about what it is that you're feeling and no, you know, and being okay with it when it's not working. But I sometimes imagine what the yoga community would be like if we had spaces where we could come together and be honest and be open and be frank and really share what we're going through and how much we would help each other. So I think any chance to have that is huge.
Yes, I agree because I think a lot of times when we're, even like say, where our our dream is to be a yoga teacher and we become a yoga teacher, but then there's some part of it that we're really having a hard time with, and we think, well, I shouldn't be having a hard. I shouldn't. Why am I having a hard time with this? I shouldn't be like this is, you know, people would love to be in this position, or and we start to speak to ourselves that way, as we shouldn't be feeling what we're feeling, or we should be grateful that that we get to come to work and do something that we love, um and we're just invalidating our own feelings and what we're experiencing. And so it's okay that if we don't love every part of it all the time, and it's okay if there's certain things that we're struggling with, and it's okay if that ebbs and flows, because it will. That's nature. Everything ebbs and flows, and our relation, just the same way that our relationship with our own personal practice, yoga, meditation, our own that ebbs and flows. There's times when it's really strong, and there's times where where we let it lapse or we get away from it, and so that happens with your teaching too, and your relationship, with your teaching, and and your purpose of of why am I teaching, and what am I teaching, and does this still resonate with me, um all of those things. That's just natural for those things to come up, but it's not often spoken about because it's yoga. Aren't we meant to be grateful all the time? I do say that with sarcasm in case I wasn't clear. Um,
No, I totally got
no,
it.
so it's, yeah, exactly that. I think it's important to, and so if there's, okay, so if there, are any new yoga teachers out there, and you started teaching at a studio, here and there, and you're getting the rhythm of your class, you're getting to know your students and your classes, and what your teaching style is like, and what's resonating with your students, and you're getting a feel for all of that. um but you know it can still feel like you're learning to walk in a certain way, and so that's, reach out to some of the other teachers at the studio, go take their classes, or say, hey, I'm kind of new to this, would you be willing to like get a coffee and sit and like talk through some things with me, um even if that's like sequencing, like, hey, does this make sense, can I run this by you, does this work in the body, um or like, I am not, am I meant to have, insure, liability insurance, how does that work, or questions out, like anything, it's a yoga, it's just, there's people out there who have experience with it. You're not alone, and so don't be afraid to seek those people out. And I would say more often than not, people are always willing to talk. I always am. Anyone can come to me at any time and talk through. I don't have to fully understand, exactly, what the details are, but I'm happy to lend an ear and listen. And so I think that that's really important. And that's why I like doing things like this sort of thing, and speaking to people and speaking about this, because it's all a part of having balance, right? So, that's what we learn in yoga. It's not all just light. There's yin and yang. There's lightness, there's darkness, and life is full of ups and downs. And especially as yoga teachers, I think we sometimes have this illusion that we're meant to be like a beacon of light all the time, and that our students see us this way, and that, you know, life as we know it would end if they caught a glimpse of anything but, you know, this radiant light. That's not light. You have to let yourself be a human. That would be a fourth piece of advice that I would give to yoga teachers is let yourself be human and let your humanness show from time to time. You know, it's not meant to be you as a teacher up here and your students down below. We're all in this life together, and are meant to be walking each other through it and helping each other through it.
I think there's a Ram Dass book called Walking Each Other Home, which,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
Like that's all we're doing.
Yes. Right, exactly. Something to the effect of we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
It's beautiful.
I as we sort of wrap up this, I'd love to know, if possible, what what does your life look like? What's an average day look like for you now?
Oh, okay. That is a good question. So my average day is I generally, to be specific, I generally wake up around 7 or 7:30, and I have a private client that most days we meet at 8 a.m. over Zoom. Um, and usually for about 2 hours. And so usually that's the first part of my day is, working with my client one on one. And I have a puppy. Well, she's one. I don't know if that's still considered, but very much has puppy energy. And so, and she knows as soon as I say goodbye, she knows that it's time to play. And so that's when we usually will play, or we'll have a walk outside, and we go get outside in nature. And for her, it's smelling everything. But for me, it's a bit of grounding. I live in a city. I live in Philadelphia, I think we said. And so nature can be a little bit hard to come by. It takes an effort to to make sure that that you actually get outside. And we have a lovely little park right at our corner that's always full of flowers. And so my dog Chloe and I, we go and we spend some time outside and fresh air. We feel the sun, and that's always usually a nice start to the day. And then I'll usually do a little bit of like work in the middle of the day. So whether that's, emails, or working on things, for teacher trainings, or planning classes, making playlists. We always forget how much time that actually does take. It's quite time consuming, preparing for classes. And so I'll usually prepare for, if I have a class later that day or the following day, I'll take some time to sit down and sort of, work through, general idea of what I have planned for the day. And I often try to have whether it's, my own practice, my own yoga practice here, or at minimum, lately I've been really dedicated to a meditation practice. And I have been, it sounds almost funny, but that time of day for me, it's between like 3 and 4 in the afternoon when I hit the slump and I'm tired and I feel like I need a nap. And instead of having a nap, I mean, if I really need a nap, I do let myself nap. But I have been utilizing meditation as opposed to actually napping because what I've learned is that what I really just need is a little like decompression and to step away from, the computer and work and whatever that is and just come back into my body, into myself. And so I have been utilizing that in the afternoons and that's been a wonderful experience. Um, and so usually I'll teach or I'll go to a class or something of the sort at night. And then I like preparing a nice early dinner. I am someone who I love to be in bed by 9. I don't necessarily go to sleep. I like to read in the evenings, but I like to be in bed with my book. So I will, prepare a dinner quite early. And so sometimes that means going to the grocery store. I tend to just kind of follow what I'm feeling that day. I don't necessarily like plan out meals or cooking. And so a lot of times that means, after, class or from the studio, I'll run to the grocery store and, see what I'm in the mood for to come up with uh, that night. But I would say that's the general flow of my day. I find that it's, I like to try to have my work during standard work hours and leave like the evenings to like myself or my family to be with my fiance and my dog and and have time like that. And so, or even if it's say we're watching a movie or TV or something, and try to have like just dedicated family time in the evenings.
I love it. I love hearing other people, like, I love hearing about how other, especially people in the yoga world, manage to, you know, move throughout their day and the different ways that practices come in. Because I love an afternoon yoga nidra practice for me personally too, instead of
Yeah.
napping. And so when you said that, I was like, oh, I'm not the old, because it is an odd time to doing kind of like meditation type things for most people. They do them morning
Yes.
or evening, but
Uh-huh.
afternoon, because I can't nap. But I find that that type of thing, whether it's meditation or yoga nidra, is exactly like you're saying. Like when you said the word
Yes.
decompress, I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's
Hmm.
the key, like my key thing sometimes to get through a day. Because I look forward to it and then I feel great after, and then it's like could just
Yes,
keep going.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a beautiful practice. Yeah, whatever it is for someone, but just having, yeah, some intentional time to reconnect, it does wonders in a day. And then you're not feeling like, oh, I ought to nap or, I need coffee or tea or something like that. It's feel refreshed and it's so I don't know, maybe it's about finding your moments of balance throughout the day.
Like you were saying before, and it's individual to each person. It's like
Mhm.
figuring it out how it is for you, and it's trial and error, like we talked about with yoga teaching as well. Like it
Yes.
really is, and some days it's out of your control, other days it's within your control. But that's life, like you say, constantly
Exactly.
in flux and ebb and flow. So
Right. There's some times when like just the other day I was subbing a class and it was at 4 o'clock. And I was like, oh boy, Danielle, that's your tough time of day, but you can do this. This is it's how life goes or you know, I've learned that, I'm not feel best and clearest in the morning and in the daytime hours. And so I that's when I do like to, if I can, that's when I like to schedule work and things like that. Because when the sun goes down, that I go down. And so
Yeah, I hear you.
And I think there's something beautifully poetic about, that's the nature of it. And so when I can, which isn't always, but when I can, I try to follow that rhythm.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for being so open and for sharing so much about your life and career. I think, as I said before, it's so helpful to hear from others. And I think that's why I love communities like Goya and having people come in and share their experiences thus far in life, because we can only learn from others and learn different skills from others. And I know that you've packed a bunch of really important things into this conversation. So I just want to say thank you so much.
And thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me, and thank you for your questions, and thank you for providing this space for, people like us to come to. And when I say that I love talking, and I'm happy to talk with anyone, anyone who's listening, reach out. If there's anything that you're going through, you want to talk through, I'm here for anyone, everyone.